Today, as we proudly begin our week of conference, this our signature event, Governance Week 2024, which will continue until Friday, June 21st. We have an opening presenter on each day. Today, you will hear from Cecile Watson from Jamaica. Tomorrow, it's Dr. Dion Chamberlain Miranda from Belize. On Wednesday, we have Jason Farley from Guyana. On Thursday, it's Aile McGlynn from Curacao, and Derek Rajak from Trinidad and Tobago ends off the discussion on Friday. Each day, we have an entirely different focus on sectors and governance. So you can expect a week of tremendous learning and insights from our opening speakers, as well as the 50+ panelists who will follow over the 5 days. You should all have received detailed agendas from the week first, but if you have not done so, please email us at info@caribbeangovernance.org and we would ensure to send it to you. So I would also like to briefly share on some of our upcoming events and workshops. On Monday, July 8th, we bring our Role of the Board series to an end with Dr. Chris Pierce from the UK, who will be taking us through how a good board is run. If you missed the other workshops in the series, you can still register for this one and get a thorough understanding of board dynamics. Dr. Pierce brings global experience to us and is very generous in answering questions that are posed during the workshop. So don't miss this opportunity to interact with him. Then on Tuesday, July 9th, Lara Quentrell Thomas will be conducting a workshop on building executive presence in the boardroom. This would be quite valuable for young executives who have joined boards and even those aspiring to be directors. We have 2 workshops for deepening your understanding of financials. Howard Dutton will conduct financial stewardship for non-finance directors on Wednesday, July 17th, and Janita John from South Africa will conduct a 3-day workshop on identifying fraud, red flags, and financial statements in early September. All of these are online, so you can easily register to participate. Also, most of you will know by now, we are planning an exciting week of activities in Guyana from November 19th to 23rd this year. There will also be 2 physical workshops there. The first is on insurance and risk on Tuesday, November 19th. The second runs for 2 days, Wednesday, November 20th and Thursday, November 21st on governance and compliance. Both of these workshops will be facilitated by Claire Gomez-Miller. And the second workshop will include a simulation from Harvard Business Publishing, which I will help facilitate. On Friday, we will host a panel discussion on effective board papers geared specifically to our corporate secretaries network. But I would advise that all persons involved in the boardroom should also join to learn on effective board papers. After which you can all join us. We will have a book signing ceremony with Professor Bob Garrett before we get into some unique Guyana games around a bonfire. The week then culminates with a governance dinner and end-of-year networking event on Saturday, November 23rd, when the opening keynote will be delivered by our beloved Professor Bob Garrett, CCGI's Global Ambassador. All of these events will be held at Splashman's Resort, which is a beautiful and unique facility built around a man-made lake in Georgetown. Registration is already open. We are offering special packages for room and meals for the weekend and are given first preference to previous participants of our end-of-year event. Space at Splashman's is extremely limited, so we encourage persons to please book your spaces before the end of July, after which we will open it up to everyone for registration. Now, as we come to today's event, I would like to make a few brief housekeeping announcements. I know the majority of you are previous participants of CCGI events, but it's important for us to remind persons that we need you to have your name correctly captured on your screen. And this is because we're in a virtual room together, which allows each of us access to engage freely with other participants. So we would like to ensure that everyone is easily identifiable. If we cannot identify who you are, you will be removed from the room. Also, we ask everyone to please keep their microphones on mute throughout the session. During the Q&A section, which will follow the presentation from Cecile and later from the panel discussions, if you wish to make a comment or ask a question, please raise your hand using the icon at the bottom of your screen. You will need to unmute yourself, and we ask that you please press the mute icon again as soon as you are done to minimize any disruptive noises in your background. You may also make comments or ask questions in the chat feature at any time during the session. Finally, we will put up a survey link towards the end of the session, and we would appreciate if you take 2 minutes and give us your feedback, please. This is really important to us as it is instrumental in how we plan and execute our events. So to set the context for this week's discussions, I would like to share that in the book, Why Nations Fail, it is argued that the violence and bloodshed in our history has embedded itself into the psyche of our people, contributing to the challenges faced over the last few generations. Today, it manifests in our governance structures and practices and is exhibited in high levels of crime and corruption, weak government institutions, and even poor corporate behavior. The Smart States Club, a book written by former president of Armenia, published in January of 2024, on how small states can not just change their destiny, but affect the world, offers a shining light for the future. In this book, Mr. Amen Sarkisian gives a personal account of his interaction with leaders of several of these small countries, which have dealt with similar adversity, but which currently prosper because of choices made by their leaders to make a positive difference. These include Botswana in Africa, Ireland in Europe, and Qatar in the Middle East, as well as his country of Armenia, which had been under Russian control as part of the USSR. Each of these have demonstrated how possible it is to emerge victorious despite adversity and limiting beliefs, which is another way to say mental slavery. Today, our world requires us to be innovative, creative, and brave, but more so to act with integrity and honor in bringing the kinds of changes so necessary to save the planet and make people's lives better. As we focus on our theme of regenerative capitalism, promoting exceptional governance for small states, we are encouraged to think about how each of us can individually, positively impact our world. For Governance Week 2024, our challenge is to address how we can take charge of our destiny and build a bright future that embraces the triple bottom line of people, planet, and profit. This, after all, is the basis of a capitalism that does not exploit, but seeks profitable organizations that utilizes and restores resources, leaving it for future generations. So, having set the context, it is now my absolute pleasure to invite our key speaker for this morning. And I would remind you, after Cecile has done her presentation and we end at 12:30 today, we go to a half-hour break before we begin our panel discussions, which follow. So I will begin now with my introduction of Cecile. Cecile Watson is a distinguished governance professional and the founder and CEO of BoardVox, a brand of Shredwiz Limited, an information security and governance company. With a mission to build better boards and enhance governance in the Caribbean, Cecile leverages her extensive experience to support governments, companies, and individuals in maintaining effective boards and safeguarding their information. Her credentials include certified financial education instructor, certified in data protection, and certified sustainability practitioner, along with training by the Commonwealth Association of Corporate Governance. Cecile's academic background includes a first-class honors degree in engineering and accolades such as the Canadian Commonwealth Scholarship and the University of Western Ontario Scholarship Award for Excellence. There's a lot more that we can say about Cecile, but her full bio is in the agenda that was sent to you earlier. So now I would like to pause there and invite Cecile to offer us her presentation for today. Cecile, over to you.
Okay, thank you so much for that warm welcome. It is a pleasure for me to be here. I am going to jump right into it because I think my presentation covers a little bit of my introduction as well in terms of why I get to do this. As you spoke, Kamla, I wrote down a couple words that you use. You said act innovatively and creatively. You talked about promoting exceptional governance. You talk about individually positively impacting our world, and you spoke also about the bright future that we are hoping for. And I think all of those really touch on the essence of what good governance delivers. So I'm going to jump right in. Thank you all for joining me here today. It's great to see my Jamaican palsies online. Just to note, Kamla introduced me as being from Jamaica, but you will tell by my accent that I am really from Barbados. I live in Jamaica. So Jamaica has been my home for a long time though. So let's begin right away. Would you tell me please which way I ought to go from here? That depends a good deal on where you want to get to. I don't much care where. Then it doesn't matter which way you go, so long as I get somewhere. I think by now you remember this story from Alice in Wonderland. Or you're sure to do that, said the cat, if you only walk long enough. And I like to use this extract when I talk about strategy because it really sets the context for if we don't know where we're going, any road can take us there. And in the world of governance and board's role in particular, we need to know where we're going. So we need a strategy. And that's what I'm going to posit here today. Just a little bit about my background further to what Kamla says. I come to be in this place as a governance practitioner, I call myself, because I work on boards, I've served boards, and I have clients who are boards. And it has really impacted on me the need to really effective governance because we have a lot of excellent professionals who are serving on board, but the governance discipline is very exacting and there's not as much breadth of an understanding of what is encapsulated there. So that brought me to this role. And I like to talk about why I care about this so much. As you will see on the far left at the top there, that's my mother and me. And my mother was a victim of the CLICO disaster that you're probably all aware of. A pensioner who expected that having spent some time at Shell as an HR professional, she would have been able to be assured of monthly pensions and then CLICO. And then in my case, I've had the chance to see upfront and close and personal bad boards. So I say failures in corporate governance invariably touch lives of ordinary people, just like you and me, and our loved ones too. So just working through this governance thing is really a personal thing for me. And what I want you to know today is why you should care is that one bad apple does, you know what, right? And so it's incumbent as we work on boards to not be that bad apple, but also to recognize when it is there and call that to account. So the flow of my presentation today is I'm going to start by giving you the context for change, why we need to change, how we do things now, the strategy imperative, why it flows from that, and then we'll talk about creating your board strategy. So to begin with, in highlighting the consequences of governance failure, we're seeking here to set the stage for why the board strategy is crucial. So I believe for most of us, working on boards is probably like the top left. You know, we sometimes feel as though we're spinning top in mud. And really we want that effortless flow, that's what we aspire to. But somehow we are not able to get there like we want to. And yet the real world needs for us to get there. There's a real world out there at the end of our decisions And it's important that we're in a position to deliver what it is expecting of us. But how do we really know we have a problem that is worth fixing? In that regard, I'm going to take you through the story of Theranos. Some of you may have heard about Theranos. It was quite a scandal coming back from 2015. And it involved a young lady called Elizabeth Holmes, who started this company with great expectations. She wanted to move from, she felt she had a solution that dealt with reducing the amount of blood you had to take from any patient in order to do tests. So she had come up with this idea that she could use a drop of blood, and that would make the difference because she could get everything she needed from that. She was able to attract a lot of attention. She rose to be Forbes #1 on the top of Forbes young startups. I think that's what it was. She was a billionaire, and she was very highly celebrated. But let's look at the oversight that happened for her. By 2014, she had recruited a high-profile board. And as we know, the board is very important in terms of attracting funding. Then she went on. By July 2015, the FDA had approved for her the one-drop technology for her blood. And so that was getting her going. But by October 2015, the report started to come through, and the Wall Street Journal started doing some investigative reporting, which was triggered by a whistleblower about the practices that were happening in Theranos. And by 2018, the company had been closed. Ms. Holmes and her partner, who was a former COO, was incarcerated, or they were charged for defrauding their investors, etc. What happened here is that it was more than just Ms. Holmes who was impacted. The technology she provided to the market, there was one woman who thought she was going to have a miscarriage, but she really had a perfect baby. Another man got results that he had late-stage prostate cancer. That was not so. And a young woman was told she had HIV. And so that created a lot of, as you can imagine, emotional stress by virtue of this technology that was put out there as to be credible. And then over 800 employees lost their jobs. Now, why did I tell you this story? By now you would be asking, well, certainly the board might have had a thing in that. But she had the most illustrious board in US corporate history. That's how it was described, the most illustrious board. As you can see here, there were 2 former US Secretary of State, a number of persons coming from the military, the board chair of a large group, the former director of the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. All these persons were part of the board of Theranos. And yet it created a dismal failure in the marketplace. So this underscores that when you get deep into it, you realize that there were issues with regards to compliance, there was issue in terms of truthfulness, and there was a lot of star power that kind of neutralized the thinking that one would expect in the boardroom. And unfortunately, in this case, the board never faced any consequences. Several of them went on to higher office. You see Kissinger and Schultz there, who continued to have quite a favorable experience in terms of their professions. And yet this was a dismal failure that certainly landed on the desks of the CEO and the COO, but the board failed in their responsibility as well. And I share that story, but there are many more. We see here on the screen, remember the SSL from Jamaica just recently. We see, remember Sam Bankman-Fried, who had their company registered in Bahamas, FLECO. You know, there are lots of stories that we can go on. The UK Post Office scandal. If you haven't been following that, that's one for you to follow now. It's all in the press as they go through an inquiry. And Silicon Valley Bank, remember also that Citicorp has faced many situations where they've had to go for bailouts. So the corporate governance failures are wide. And I want to underscore that there's a real world at the end of the decisions that we make. Decisions that we make impact lives. And so they also impact the lives of the shareholders, their investors at the end of these decisions who put their money at risk, their capital at risk, their customers who are depending on the integrity of our products and services, their employees who come to work and they get paycheck but feed their families from it. And going back to Theranos, there were 800 employees who lost their job in a matter of 3 years, went from 800 to 0. And then there's suppliers who depend on the supply chain to keep their businesses growing. And ultimately, it culminates in our friends and our families. So corporate governance is not this hairy-fairy thing out there that we do. We turn up to meetings, we sit down, we go through our meetings or not. We pay attention or not. We turn up or not. Corporate governance is an important function for any business professional to be engaged within, and there's significant implications of how we do that, Recently, Richard Biles from the Bank of Jamaica made this statement where he says, when an institution fails and the taxpayer has to draw the check, then it becomes a lifelong debt around your neck. And I think those of us in Jamaica have seen that, and there's now some, there have been moves afoot since all of that has happened to embed a more robust corporate governance structure in Jamaica, both in the private sector and also in the public sector. And I dare say that we are ahead of the region in that regard, but we still have a lot of work to do. So I've set the context for why a good strategic governance program does work and is necessary. But I'm going to underscore it as well with the strategy imperative to build on what I've said before by providing, because we need empirical evidence to support that the board needs a board strategy, correct? So I'm going to try and present that to you to kind of make this a compelling case that we need to change how we practice governance. We need to change how we serve on boards. We need to have more passion for what we do in that regard. So let's look here, and I'm drawing here from the PwC Board Effectiveness Survey, not of boards, but the service of the C-suite. And they said that 92% of them, executives, are saying that one or more of their directors on their board should be replaced. Then we have 30% of executives rating their board's performance as excellent or good. That means 70% rated below excellent or good, right? And then we have 20% of executives who think their board's performance is poor. Now that could be your board, that could be my board, but there are 20% of executives who feel that way. And then there are 40% of executives who think their boards effectively understand their role, which says that 60% think we may not be understanding our roles or we don't. So there's room for improvement. PwC went on in terms of their 2024 survey, they said Caribbean Pulse survey. They entitled it, "The Time for Talking is Over. The Caribbean Needs Action Now." And I think that that is a very key message in all that we're doing here. Because when that Pulse survey, 40% of the organizations in the Caribbean don't currently conduct board assessments. So we don't even know where we are. We don't even know how we're performing. Our eye is not on that ball. And then 75% of the organizations in the Caribbean that actually do perform board performance event assessments, they evaluate them internally and not independently. As you can imagine, the consequence of when reviewers not having sufficient knowledge or practice in this regard, or even being able to come back and share the hard news with the board, that kind of neutralizes the impact of doing the survey. And so the best practice is to at least do external evaluation at least once every 2 or 3 years. And then more than a third of the organizations in the Caribbean that do board assessment, they actually don't take any action. So they're doing the work, paying for the survey in time and sometimes in terms of fees for consultants, and yet they don't take any action for the results. Why do you think that is? Is it that we have too little transparency in terms of how we operate on boards today? Is it that our public isn't sufficiently aware and understanding about governance and what they should be demanding of directors? I don't know the answers to that, and it just struck me. Why is that where we are? But a couple of years back, this Financial Times in the UK, they led this new agenda program. And Lionel Barber, who's the former journalist and former editor of the Financial Times, said, in the decades since the global financial crisis, the liberal capitalist model has come under strain, particularly the focus on maximizing profits and shareholder value. These principles of good business are necessary, but not sufficient. It's time for a reset. Now, when they did that, it was pre-COVID. And if it was a time for reset then, there's even more of a time for reset now. We have AI on our heels that is changing the world as we know it. And even if we don't start understanding it within our boards, we have to understand that our competitors may be ahead of the game there. So we don't have the latitude of saying, let's do it down the road. The time is now. This change is happening at a rapid pace, and not just rapid, it's acceleratingly rapid. And so it really is incumbent to change the nature of how we govern. Now, some of the larger markets, the directors can be full-time. We don't have that here, but we still have the same level of responsibility, and therefore we have to work smarter. So what do we need to really know about how we are going to be operating? And I want to underscore here that not doing the wrong thing is not the same as doing the right thing. So there has to be a shift in terms of how we design our board life so that we have the impact that we want. I think Cameron says a bright future and individually positively impacting our world. And that's what we need to be doing. And so there's a push, there's a call for us to get super focused and super organized. We need to move from being involved to committed. I show here a quick plate of breakfast, because I like to always say, you know, here we have a case where the chicken and the pig were presenting us this breakfast. But the difference here is the chicken was involved, but the pig was certainly committed, right? And we need that level of commitment when we go to the boardroom, where we understand that we're there for a purpose with a specific role. We need to know and understand that role, and we need to execute it flawlessly. Not perfectly, flawlessly in terms of where we are and trying to do things right, but doing the right things right. And so the other thing we need to do is we need to move from showing up to performing up. When you get to the stage where you're sitting on a board, I think it is important for you to really realize that you're not looking to others to motivate you to perform. It may inspire your action, but that has to come from you because you recognize the huge responsibility of the role that you have and the accountability that you have as well, even if it's not being measured today, because the day may come when it will be. And then we need to move from being on the board to working on the board. And so it really requires you to make the time to invest yourself in what is required to fulfill your board responsibilities. So that takes me now to creating your board strategy. And here we want to provide a clear, actionable plan for boards to develop and execute their strategy. So that's what I'm going to take you through now. And this is what I have devised as I sat and I thought about it. Kamala would have mentioned that I did this opinion post about the board strategy because it struck me. Why doesn't the board, as a strategic operative, a key strategic operative, mind you, why does it not have its own strategy? So I wrote a piece on that, and that's what attracted her to me. And here, a couple of weeks after, and here I am. So we are all familiar with the strategic process. Probably everyone doesn't do it at this level of stretch, but we really are developing that vision out for the future. We want to have those programs then to convert that vision to strategy, and then even more important than the time that we spend in terms of visioning is the program to implement the strategy. That's at the organization level. And similarly, I am positing that we need something similar for the board level. So here's my 5-point plan to get super focused and super organized. It's 5 elements. We got to see the big picture. We have to determine if we're on track. You have to plan to be where you need to be as a board. I'm not talking about the organization here, I'm talking about the board. We have to do the right thing at the right time, and we have to inspect what we expect. So how do we do that? Again, super focused, super organized. This is a framework that I've developed that I believe can carry us through that process in a pretty seamless way, because we're drawing on a lot of the existing frameworks that are there that guides in terms of the organization strategy. And I'm going to take you through each one step by step. But first is to note that in the organization strategy statement, that's what drives the board in its engagement in this framework. The strategy from the organization is set, and then the board, like any other functional unit in the organization, has to consider what it needs to be doing to be aligned to that strategy and to support the organization in realizing its business goals. And so they, of course, in terms of the organization strategy, the board has a specific role to play as well. There's a new ISO 37,000 standard that deals with corporate governance, and they've identified that the board should directly engage with the organization strategy. We all know this. We set the stair. The management may do the heavy lifting, but we ultimately, as a board, have to decide what that strategy is. We have to approve it. It is fundamental to the role that we are called to play. So let's look now at the first element, the governance model canvas, which is really a take from the business model canvas. Several elements that on one page gives you a very good map of what the board is there to do, because I don't think all directors have the same understanding at the same time of what that looks like. And certainly those in the C-suite don't either. So this, as much as I say this to the board, this requires an understanding at all levels of the senior levels of the organization. So I say you have to be the builder, not the homeowner. And in that regard, I'm thinking, like, if you're the homeowner, you just move in. As the builder, you have to understand how this house is to be put together. And so in terms of a canvas on the far right, those areas are in green, are the outward focus areas. So you got to know who your stakeholders are. You have to be active in terms of stakeholder engagement, the compliance factor, how you work with the regulators, the purpose, and it's just fundamental in terms of understanding what is the board's purpose and being able to articulate it in line with what your regulations, etc., are guiding you to say. And then there's value creation, a fundamental role of the board, and it's covered also in the ISO 37,000 standards. And then on the far left is to understand your roles and responsibilities, also understand the duties and obligations as underpinned by legislation and corporate governance codes, etc. The nature of your oversight, are you doing it with the focus intended? And then the tone at the top. Now, why would you want to do this? You want to do this as a practice with your board so that you can all come together and have a common understanding of these elements. As someone who does a fair amount of training with boards, I will tell you that there are a lot of assumptions about what we really do understand. And when you get boards in the room together, you start having the conversation, you can see the disparity of appreciation for the extent of what it understands. Maybe if you were able to knit all the different pieces together from the different members, you might get a picture, but it isn't there today in terms of how we practice governance. So that's my first part of the framework. Then the value creation analysis, where we're now going to say, how do you determine if you're on track? So that's the section of the 5-point plan. So I would say, be the GPS, not the map. You don't want to be so low down. You want to be able to understand exactly how you're setting out to do what you're called on to do. And value creation is one of the key areas that the board is expected to do. And so across this framework, you will see 8 different elements that requires the board's considered thinking. How do they create value in terms of financial performance? And again, remember, I'm not talking about the organization. I'm talking through the lens of the board. How are you contributing into the customer value proposition? Operational excellence, the whole human capital. Warren Buffett once said that the most important role of a board is choosing your CEO and then managing their performance. When it comes to brand and reputation, one of the things that gets directors' attention very quickly is when you end up in the press in a negative manner. Don't wait till you get there. Make sure you understand how you're going to treat with it so you don't have to run from the press. Impact on stakeholders. There's a lot of debate about who really the board is here to serve. We know that it's serving the organization, and that is automatically assumed that it's only shareholders, but there's stakeholders out there who are important. I think I actually did refer to that back in the first segment of this presentation. And then how we build the strategic partnerships and alliances that will support the whole value creation for the organization. And then finally, the social and environmental responsibility that we're all being held to account for now. And that takes me to point 4, which is the board strategy statement. Very similar to a strategy statement that you would be aware of in the usual strategy programs, working through the purpose of the board, the vision for the board, what does the board want to see itself becoming, its guiding principles. Usually we talk about the values for the organization, but in this context, it's more than just your values. We're talking about the governance principles that underpin how you operate in your function. And then the mission of the board, get a really understanding of what exactly you're there to do so that you avoid these areas in terms of overreaching and working too tactical, etc. And then setting strategic priorities that are aligned with the organization's strategic plan. So you need to know that if, for instance, the organization is setting out to do something big in AI, and the board has to, maybe one of their components is to do something in that space as well, and that becomes a key strategic priority for the board. And then I suggest overarching all of this is a board's beacon statement. I call it that because it sets the steer for the board to understand how they can be engaging around the whole focus of having a statement that captures in 2 to 5 words what you stand for, how do you represent to yourself, what is it that is going to drive you into action. Is it something like excellence in governance could be your board's beacon statement, etc. But it should be very specific in being, it should be brief, it should be empowering, it should be aspirational, it should be outcome focused, and it should be navigational. So I've built a framework around all of that in terms of walking through the strategy. And then finally is the one before the last is the board alignment scorecard, which again is very similar to the board's performance balanced scorecard. Sorry, had a brain freeze there. And here we're talking about doing the right things at the right time. So very, very clear on how, as you move across your areas of focus, that you are aligning the activities that you have planned for yourself as a board in accordance with those priority areas. So it starts from the bottom here in terms of the organization's strategic priorities, that informing the board's strategic priorities, and also the CEO's performance charge, which should also be informed by the board's strategic priorities. And then moving up through the ranks to fostering your capabilities along those board conduct, board improvement, board composition, etc., all culminating into looking at the board performance and accountability and knowing exactly what your objectives are in any of these categories. It does not have to be all at the same time, but knowing what you're about. And finally, is to work through the board strategy work plan, where you now have a very clear, crystal clear what your program needs to be, and you're planning to inspect what you expect by having your understanding of when, at what points over the course of your journey through the future, you will be looking and addressing these things, how they form, they make their way to your agenda, etc. So this 5-point plan, the board strategy framework, is geared towards enhancing your governance effectiveness, improving your decision-making, and enhancing your stakeholder confidence, which is all of what you want to accomplish. And I'm going to close with this very small story about this guy called BT. And he was, in the past, when lion tamer came into the ring, we used to only have a whip. And invariably, the lion tamer never made it until the chair came into play. Because Clive Beatty, he was a young boy who joined the circus. He started off as a cage cleaner. And over time, he was able to move up the ranks because he became a really good performer, because he discovered the power of the chair. And I'm not talking about the chairman here. Chair, the one with the 4 legs. Because he discovered that when he brought the chair into the ring, suddenly the lion, as they say in Jamaica, turned fool. Could not focus. He just, there was too much before him. Whereas the whip was easy to identify and he could go after the lion tamer, when he had the 4 legs pointing at him, he got totally discombobulated. And so he could not. And I believe that that's where we find ourselves many times in the boardroom. Too much coming at us at the same time. We become order takers. We go through the agenda day from day 1 to next month, and we don't weigh into what should be on that agenda and whether what is on that agenda is serving the organization. Too many things coming at us too many times at the same time, and it's important for us to bring order to that, get super focused, get super organized. And that's my story about the board strategy and why you should care about it.
Thank you so much, Cecile. This presentation did not disappoint at all. You know, it is exactly what I would have expected from you. So I'm just going to ask persons, if you want to take Cecile's contact information, take a few seconds to take a photo of her slide, and then I'm going to ask her to stop share so we can engage the last 10 minutes of today's session in a bit of Q&A, because I'm sure participants have questions and comments. I will tell you, I have many, because this presentation was so beautifully packaged into a very clear story as to what we need to do and why. And I really liked some of the models that you shared, Cecile. So yes, great, thank you. So I'm just going to invite participants. If anyone had a question or a comment, please raise your hand using the icon at the bottom of your screen so that you can engage the conversation. If you prefer, you can put it in the chat and I would raise and share it with Cecile so she can respond. And while we wait for persons to get their thoughts together to engage with us, Cecile, I want to say that so much of what you have shared is critical for us to understand, but I love the way you started with telling us about that illustrious board that was in place over Theranos, which was really engaging in criminal acts. by giving people false information because they knew, the CEO knew that those information were not correct, but because she had this intent of being the billionaire, and the board simply bought into the charisma of what she shared and did not ask for the evidence and the right information. And I agree with you. We should question as to why it is that board never had to face consequences for
Yeah.
what happened in that case.
Yes.
I also truly liked your 5-point plan, and I tell you that governance model canvas, that is a beauty. I think if we can dissect that and for every board apply it to their specific organization, it certainly would help. Because one of the things I want to share, which caught my attention when Cecile wrote on LinkedIn, she asked, do we understand what is board strategy? And I was taken aback because I thought I knew the answer to that until I actually read her article and I saw, as she argued, very often in the boardroom, when we talk board strategy, we discuss the organizational strategy. And that is where sometimes a lot of these gaps occur. And so directors themselves are not even sure of what they're contributing, how they're contributing, how effective they're being in their contribution in the boardroom. And because as you shared with the PwC research, and Ronald is in the room, so we say hello to Ronald, one of the persons instrumental in this PwC research.
Lovely.
As you shared, Ronald, let's ask you, as you were in the room too, and you can interact with Cecile. One of the things she pointed to was the lack of board evaluations in the region. And so I tried to capture some of those figures quickly, but it showed that even the boards that were doing evaluation, they were really doing internal evaluations as opposed to having independent evaluations done. And then more than a third of those boards had no action plan for what follows up after that is done. So I want to ask you to share a bit on that to us, and then we'll come back to Cecile on how she can help us get boards to want to do their evaluations more frequently.
I think part of the answer to the last question first goes back a lot to guidance we've received many times from Professor Garrett. Our boards have to want to be learning boards. They have to want to continue to grow, continue to identify opportunities for individual and collective growth. So that's a part of the final answer, I think. But going back to what we've seen, both in our own practice and based on the survey results, is that we're still to some extent in a bit of a box ticking mode, rather than coming from a position of, yes, we want to continue to learn and grow. We want to identify those opportunities to maximize our skill sets, to understand what collectively as a board we need to really be able to perform at the highest possible level in the best interests of the company and its stakeholders. So we are seeing still a fair percentage of those who are actually undertaking assessments, still doing so year after year as self-assessments. And that's fine, but our recommendation is that at least periodically, we take a step back as human beings who are vulnerable to our own opinions of ourselves, not necessarily being accurate. We're all guilty of that. Giving yourself the opportunity to create an environment that allows for a confidential, safe space for individual directors to share their concerns, share their any positive feedback as well they have in terms of board and collective performance and individual performance, so that they can build on those. But it also provides a safe space for the voicing of concerns when there are issues that need to be addressed. So it really does need to come from the chairman helping to create that safe environment, the company secretary or legal counsel participating in the process, assuring directors that that is a space that's been created, and then giving them the opportunity to provide information first and foremost via a questionnaire, but then also an interview process, again, that allows for the voicing of those concerns and the identification of opportunities for the board to grow. We're not seeing enough of that. And again, I think that comes from a space of we know what we need to know, the way we operate our businesses. We've been doing this for 10, 20, 30 years, and we don't necessarily think that there's much benefit. So we will continue to do these self-assessments that don't necessarily give us the value that we think there's a potential to create.
Yeah.
So because you function in that space, I know you're going to respond, but I want to ask you one time to also add, from your experience with the companies that do board evaluations, what is the difference you see? Why does those companies are being proactive in that way?
Okay, so I think that as is Ronell
or Ronnie, yeah.
As Ronnie said, you know, a lot of it is still check the box. You know, we're getting a lot more aware about the corporate governance codes, etc. Jamaica just implemented one, and you know, it calls for those board evaluations. You're a member of the PSOJ, you may decide you're going to do it. You have to get the attention of the influencers in the boardroom. But I think a lot of it can come as well from the C-suite, because if the CEO is aware and understands that they need their board to perform better, they can initiate that process either through the chairman or with the corporate secretary to bring these people in. But, you know, it's an interesting thing. One director said to me that one organization, when it started on the ramp of doing this corporate governance thing, there was a feeling, but why are we bothering? Because even if you make all these changes, it doesn't impact the share price. It really doesn't impact. We are not hearing any stories of governance failures in the Caribbean where people are being jailed, etc. Those are all foreign stories. It happens to them. It doesn't happen to us. We assume it will never happen to us, and it's like insurance. It's always good until you never need it until you do, right? And so, you know, we really have, it goes back to when I do my training, one of the things I say to directors, say, if when you leave here, you're not a little bit afraid, I haven't done my job. Because it's important to underscore, to help people to understand how these little things that they may overlook can come back to haunt us. They say the minutes are a letter to the judge. So when you think of the minutes as a letter to a judge, when you're approving your minutes, you got to look and see if what is there is what represents what you intended. If not, you know, that whole thing about jointly and severally liable as a board, you know, it goes back to the one bad apple spoiling the whole bunch. So the best boards to serve on are the ones where you have engaged directors, people who get it, right? And that's why I find that, you know, when you do the training and you get people to the level of getting it, they're more likely then to think, okay, let's get a sense of that pulse. Let's find out where we are. And that's why I like to train boards en masse as opposed to dealing on the individual level. Because when you get them to the room and they get it, getting them now to the point of saying, okay, let's do these things, it gets easier. So that's my experience. I think the market is still very young in terms of the public awareness, but there are certain things happening in the region now where we know it will change. We have whistleblower protection acts being rolled out. People, you know, even the Theranos case, there was a whistleblower who brought it to the attention of the board, the esteemed, illustrious star-studded board early on, who decided to dismiss her. She talked her way back into retaining the job, and she turned around and she fired the whistleblowers a couple weeks after, sorry. There are stories in terms of Barclays in the UK, where the CEO there went to the length of trying to figure out who the whistleblower was, and he got clawbacks in his compensation. We don't have any of that stuff in the region. So it's really largely dependent on people doing the right thing. and being accountable not only to self, but accountable for each other to help steer us in the role of doing the right thing. You know, I get the opportunity to serve on boards where I really take a lot of interest in building the relationships on that board so that I can influence when I see things not going quite the way that I believe that they should go. And likewise, to be drawing on the expertise of those others that serve with, to learn from them as well, because we can't know it all, certainly. And that's why what you're doing here is so important. It really kickstarts that conversation at a regional level that is really, really important to who we are to become if we are to impact lives positively and have that bright future.
Yes. Now, it is at 12:30, which is our official cutoff time, but I'm going to ask persons just to give us a few extra minutes. Ronald, I did see that you had unmuted. Okay, so she didn't have an additional response. That's fine. So I know Professor Garrett is only with us for this morning's session. So I wanted to just ask him if he wanted to share any thoughts this morning. Could be a reflection of yesterday's opening ceremony as well, as we bid him goodbye for today. But I will share with you guys in a little bit what's going to follow after this morning's presentation. Professor Garrett?
No, I'm just delighted with Cecile's presentation. Absolutely spot on. May you prosper. May you flourish and prosper. Because I think this is absolutely key. The I think from yesterday, the thing I took away is how can we begin to create a sufficient gravity in what we're doing and saying in these seminars and at this conference to really begin to open the negotiations with CARICOM about affecting the region. And I don't have a simple answer to that, but I think the quality of what's happening here shouldn't be lost. So well done. And I'm delighted that, again, Ronel's work, which seems to be unique to the region at the moment, is being used more and more. Great. And I think she should be supported by others now to actually expand that sort of work. Yeah.
Thank you, Professor.
So, okay, I must disappear now. So many thanks. I wish you best for the rest of the day. Thank you.
Thank you for your kind words.
Okay, bye.
Bye.
Thank you very much, Professor Garrett. And thank you so much, Cecile.
Yeah, Kamla, I just want to say as well in terms of the PwC surveys, because the statistics I shared in terms of the C-suite survey was from the US, I believe. It was on Caribbean Pulse. And so I think that the next evolution of the board survey does need to also include evaluation of how the C-suite sees the board, because that also brings valuable information to help guide you in terms of what improvements could be made.